Many of you are well aware by now that I challenged Ana Kasparian on her views on Tulsi Gabbard. Now, this challenge wasn't actually issued out of malice as much as it was out of concern for the unity and the progression of the progressive movement as a whole. As most of you know, I'm big on making sure that if we are going to critique our allies, we must critique them as such, while remembering that if we try and use disparaging smear tactics in order to critique our allies, the very same smear tactics that come from the neoliberals and the neoconservatives, then we are no better than them. And in fact, we are equipping them with the ammo to take down the left, and more specifically, the progressive movement. Now, Ana took issue with what I had to say, and I can't really blame her. However, when she took to Twitter to tell the world that the only reason that I tell the truth and reveal facts about Tulsi Gabbard is because Tulsi Gabbard said a couple of nice things about me. Now, let's ignore the fact that I've critiqued her in the past, and Tulsi is very well aware of this, and so is her family and her staff, as much as I've given facts about her. Ana clearly was not aware of this. And at the end of the day, Ana Kasparian decided to say that Tulsi Gabbard was not progressive, and that was untrue. And rather than engaging in a back and forth on Twitter, I challenged her to a debate, and that offer is still withstanding. Now, with that being said, they did finally decide to invite Tulsi Gabbard onto their show. But, of course, before they have her on the show, Ana had to get one last jab in order to try to win over her audience before Tulsi Gabbard made her appearance. Now, in the first 30 seconds of this no-filter takedown of Tulsi Gabbard, Ana Kasparian actually comes off rather complimentary, even going so far as to declare her a progressive and discuss how excited she was about Tulsi Gabbard. The problem with, well, the entire video is that she frames it as if she has been a long supporter of Tulsi Gabbard and that she currently considers Gabbard a supporter despite a few minor progressive critiques. However, that's not the case. By Ana's own admission, she does not consider Tulsi Gabbard a progressive, and her tone alone, well, reveals how biased she actually is.
I'm sorry, FXS7 says, Tulsi Gabbard is a progressive. I don't hear TYT ever mentioning her.
She's not a progressive.
No, that's not fair.
On foreign policy issues, she's not a progressive. But
now she starts off by saying, I want to be upfront about my own biases. And even though she goes on to talk about how much she supposedly used to like Tulsi Gabbard, like I said, the previous video clip actually reveals her biases and better codifies this video and her biases that are revealed in this video. She also goes on to say that it would be misleading and unfair if she didn't talk about the criticisms that progressives have of her, which it would be true. But what's even more misleading and unfair is the context behind which she puts these criticisms. So in an effort to actually be objective, in an effort to actually be informative, in an effort to protect journalism and objectivity, I decided that I was going to critique the critique and offer some proper context to the statements that Ana Kasparian made, disparaging Tulsi Gabbard. Now, Ana immediately opens up with an article written in The Intercept by Chavez. Now, what she says is that the Intercept article says that Tulsi Gabbard is still a strong advocate of the global war on terror. Now, what she does not go on to say, however, is that linked in that statement in the article by The Intercept, which, by the way, the entire article was a smear piece, which is also something that Ana probably should have mentioned when she was giving this information. But either way, what she probably could have at least mentioned was the fact that linked to that statement was Tulsi Gabbard's website, so that she could explain to us in her own words. However, the words on her website didn't actually match the statement that was linked to it, trying to use the website as a source to support its absurd notion that Tulsi supports the global war on terror, which we ultimately know has become a global war on regime change. So I decided to look at the link, and it turns out that Tulsi's statements on the website say the total opposite of what that statement by The Intercept that Anna used tried to say. What the website actually says is that we must keep our soldiers out of the Middle East, out of obviously regime change wars, and for the most part, out of people's businesses. However, what it does say is that terrorism is still a problem. ISIS is still very real. Al-Qaeda and other groups like those are still existent. And Tulsi understands that this is largely due to our assistance. Whether economically or militarily, we have propped up terrorist groups across the Middle East, not only in the last 20 years, but really in the last 70 years, in an effort to combat basically any type of secular, nationalized governments that wish to use their resources to invest in the people. Now, understanding this, we can properly frame why it would still be important to assist when asked certain governments, certain groups in getting their terrorist groups that we propped up out of their region. Now, it seems fitting to me that a commander-in-chief would understand the responsibility of taking care of nations that we assisted in the destruction of. If we look at Syria, for example, if we look at Yemen as another example, we can even look at Iraq and Afghanistan. No one is advocating to send soldiers back into those countries. No one is advocating for military operations in those countries either. However, I think that we can all agree that the humanitarian thing to do would be to team up with other peace-seeking entities to give us legitimate assistance in order to make sure that these countries can peacefully rebuild. And in order for them to peacefully rebuild, the terrorist cells that we helped prop up must be removed. And all Tulsi Gabbard advocated for on her website was to make sure that these organizations have the ability to move these cells that we propped up. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that, and I wouldn't call that advocating for a global war on terror because, like I said, the website specifically says we should not be sending troops into these countries. Now, Anna goes on to present a quote that Tulsi said in 2015, that she was a hawk when it comes to terrorism. However, she's a dove when it comes to regime change. Now, I would agree that that was a poor choice of words. But given the context of the time period that we were in, the unfortunate truth was all of us, for quite some time, have had poor choice of words when describing issues that we were passionate about. At one point, the entire country was on board with the quote unquote global war on terror, mostly because of the lies that we were told. Now, of course, later on, we found out that the global war on terror was a sham. However, Tulsi's resolve in eradicating the terrorism that the United States has propped up, I believe, has not changed. And like I said, I do agree that that was a poor choice of words because it's like the war on drugs, and I agree. The war on drugs in that statement did lead to the death and destruction of dozens of black communities and thousands of black lives. In understanding that, I understand that it is important to choose our words correctly. And Tulsi has clearly evolved on that. And if anyone has been listening to her interviews, she's been very clear about where she stands. And she doesn't use the word, I'm a hawk on terrorism. However, she does make it very clear that she is for righting the wrongs committed at the hands and under the watch of the United States. And I don't see much of a problem with that, especially if that means we keep our troops out of these countries. And if we're teaming up with other humanitarian groups, legitimate ones, then once again, I agree that we do have the responsibility to do so, considering that we are responsible for the destruction of many of these nations. Now, It's also important to understand that in the context of Tulsi's policy advocacy, being a hawk on terror and terrorism doesn't seem to be that bad of a thing, considering that we understand that she knows what context she would be, quote unquote, hawkish on terrorism with. Like, we understand what she means by that. She means we must disallow the United States to engage in the propping up of terrorist regimes. And if you're going to be a hawk in keeping the U.S. out of propping up terrorist organizations, then I think I'm okay with that. I'm perfectly fine with you being a hawk on terror if that's what you meant. But once again, because we understand the importance of words and we understand how these words are used, I get why it's a poor choice of words. But once again, she's also evolved and hasn't used that term since 2015, which is also a fun fact that Ana Kasparian has left out, along with not addressing the fact that many of the statements that Tulsi made were in 2015. She refuses to acknowledge the fact that Tulsi has evolved on almost every issue, including the one just mentioned, since 2015. And I'll go a little bit deeper into that in a second. Like I was just saying, Tulsi is a hawk on terror. And despite the fact that that's a poor choice of words, it nonetheless remains true. And she's such a hawk on terror that she introduced the Stop Financing Terrorism bill that unfortunately didn't get passed. And Ana, for some reason, left this part out. And she also introduced the Stop Arming Terrorists bill, which, once again, didn't get passed. And I think that it probably should be mentioned that all the progressive warriors that we love and appreciate, nonetheless, still did not speak out or advocate for the legislation that Tulsi had introduced. I think that would be a little bit problematic, and considering once again that Ana has never done anything like this on the problematic support of Bernie Sanders for some policies, or the issues that Bernie Sanders has with foreign policy, and the litany of issues that Elizabeth Warren has on foreign policy, I find it interesting that she didn't take issue with none of these progressives not endorsing legislation that would essentially have ended U.S. support of terrorism abroad. Now, Ana goes on to say that Tulsi supports torture tactics. And, well, I'll let Tulsi tell you herself, but I find it interesting that in the video, which of course will be linked in the description below, Ana frames most of the conversation about how bad torture is and how bad the CIA is and how much our government intelligence agencies lie when it comes to things like trying to justify the use of torture. And I would agree with that. However, she never really correctly frames what Tulsi said. And if you watch the clip, Tulsi actually contradicted Ana's statement.
Tulsi's hawkishness toward terror has led her to support military actions I, along with many other progressives, disagree with. Torture tactics like waterboarding, which were given the euphemism of enhanced interrogations, was something that Tulsi was supportive of.
Soldier, how do you respond to the much discussed report on the CIA's use of torture and what some Americans have called a blot on American values? Do you share that opinion, or as a soldier, do you have a very different perspective on the use of torture?
Very bluntly, I'm conflicted. I'm conflicted on this report. There are, I think the jury is still out on the report itself. There have been comments that there are things missing or it was incomplete, and there are differing opinions on the report itself. But as I think about it myself, clearly we would not like to see any human, any person around the world being treated inhumanely. On the other side, I can also understand that any of us, if we're in a situation where our family or our community, our state or our country is in a place where, let's say in an hour, a nuclear bomb or an attack will go off unless this information is found. I believe that if I were the president of the United States, that I would do everything in my power to keep the American people safe.
So even in that clip, where Tulsi was, I would say for the most part, understanding of both sides. Now, that may not have been an answer that many people would have liked to hear. However, She understands this as well. And Ana, if she would have watched the interview by former TYT investigative reporter Jordan Sheraton when he sat down with Tulsi Gabbard, then she would have had her answer clarified, because Tulsi Gabbard has used her power to try and push down and smack down every single amendment that would have advocated for torture, and she supported every single amendment that would have banned torture from the United States permanently.
I think you were on a program in India, and as far as torture, you kind of, I mean, you said you were torn. This was in response to the Senate torture report, kind of talking about, well, if we had intelligence that within 24 hours a nuclear bomb was going to explode. I'll be honest, it did come off a little wish-washy to me. I'd love your thoughts on, you either have the one camp that says torture in any form is just wrong, but also ineffective. So as president, would you, unequivocally rule it out? And if so, what changed from 2014?
Yeah. That report had literally just come out. I hadn't had time to look at it and to read it when that interview was taking place. Obviously have since. And through my time on the Armed Services Committee in Congress over the last 5 years, I've supported amendments to the defense bill that ban torture, ban these enhanced interrogation techniques, and as president will continue to strongly oppose torture and the use of those techniques.
And yet, Ana does not mention this. And on Twitter, Ana even went on to say and allude to the idea that Tulsi never clarified where she stood on torture. Now, I do want to say, in Tulsi's defense, when she made the original statement, she admits in Jordan Sheridan's interview, of course, that she had no idea. She didn't get to go through that report because it had just been put in front of her face hours beforehand. And once again, let me be very clear. The unfortunate truth of the matter is we had a lot more faith in our intelligence community, at least a little more faith, I should say, in 2014 than we now do in 2019. And Tulsi Gabbard was responding as such. Now, once again, I believe her original answer even still came off as compassionate. And I believe that given the circumstances she had presented, saying that if there was an hour and there was information she could get to save the entire country, that's a whole different situation than most of the circumstances that torture would have been used in and has been allowed to be used in. And although I don't really agree with torture, because I know how our country is going to use it, in that really specific scenario where Tulsi was saying this is what both sides are observing, I don't think acknowledging what both sides are saying is wrong at all. In fact, I think it's pretty judicious of her. Now, Ana goes on to play a clip of Tulsi on Fox News and basically says that because of Tulsi's words describing radical Islam and how to fight it, that she leaves out that the U.S. foreign policy actually aids radical Islam. The problem is, which I feel like I don't have to address and I shouldn't have to address, but we're going to address it anyway, that's Tulsi Gabbard's entire presidential campaign. I mean, at every single turn, in every single interview, in every single conversation, in every single speech, every single event, in every single town hall, Tulsi Gabbard speaks fervently and poignantly about how the United States foreign policy actually aids and abets terrorism. Just last week, speaking on Yemen, she actually spoke to the fact that we arm Al-Qaeda. Ironically enough, but not surprisingly, no news source covered it. Tulsi very well understands how U.S. foreign policy aids and abets terrorism. And for Ana to say this demonstrates, like much of the takedown from Ana, she's either willfully choosing not to watch Tulsi's interviews, or she is watching the interviews and totally ignoring the facts, or purposely misrepresenting what Tulsi Gabbard has said. I will concede that Tulsi's words when describing Islam and radical Islamic extremists were bothersome. They were upsetting, and I didn't really like them. And I don't think that that's problematic to say. And the reason why I can say that is because, once again, let's put things in context. Is Tulsi Gabbard who she was in 2015 and 2019? I think we can all agree that she isn't. Are you the same as you were in 2015, in 2014, as you were in 2019? If you're watching this show, it's highly likely that you were not. People must realize when we're talking about how words can how we use words and our understanding of how important they are when it comes to manufacturing consent, and when something comes off as being bigoted, as being Islamophobic, how we use these words and our understanding of that has evolved so much in the last 3 to 4 years that trying to compare her policy stances now to what she said in 2014 and 2015 is completely unfair. And now, if you wanted to critique these things and ask her these questions, it would be okay. However, in this particular case, I'm saying it's unfair because we haven't seen these type of criticisms lobbed against any of the other candidates that Ana Kasparian has clearly supported. And given that Ana herself says she doesn't believe that she doesn't believe Tulsi Gabbard is progressive on foreign policy or progressive at all, I find it interesting that she has never lobbed this accusation against Elizabeth Warren, and she's never lobbed this accusation against Bernie Sanders, even though in the same video, she actually does a good job of critiquing Bernie Sanders when it comes to supporting drone strikes. Although this is a critique she has of Tulsi Gabbard as well, that ironically enough, she only really addressed the Bernie Sanders criticism because of the video that I said that talks about Bernie Sanders supporting drone strikes. Now, if Bernie supports drone strikes and Tulsi supports drone strikes, I do think it should be addressed why they both have quote unquote supported it. I think it should be given context. They both say that drones are a weapon and they're going to be used because it's true. Unfortunately, the fact of the matter is, in our current state, drone strikes are going to be used. However, how we use them and when we use them should probably be the more debated issue. If we know we have a humanitarian, if we know we have someone who's anti-regime change, and if you know we have someone who is making every attempt to keep soldiers and troops out of various countries, we know that the factors that have been used to justify drone strikes in the past will be mitigated greatly, hopefully almost down to zero. Given that these factors would be mitigated, they fit perfectly into the bubble of why Bernie Sanders and Tulsi would support them in certain scenarios. There would have to be a legitimate reason, a legitimate threat, and an immediate threat to American national security. And otherwise, I'm pretty confident that neither Bernie nor Tulsi would just use drone strikes as if it's a video game or in an attempt to overthrow a regime, because both of them have made it very clear that they do not support the proxy wars that have propped up situations and propagated situations that have made drone strikes normalized in our current military-industrial complex. She even goes on to try and make Tulsi guilty by association. See, Steve Bannon and David Duke have endorsed Tulsi Gabbard. But the truth of the matter is, it seems like they go on to endorse whoever the hell they want to if they can stir up some trouble. Steve Bannon and David Duke also obviously endorsed Trump at one point, and David Duke even went on to endorse Hillary. David Duke seems to not know what the hell he wants. However, saying that someone is guilty by association in the way that Ana is trying to allege isn't fair. It isn't a fair critique. It is, in my opinion, intellectually dishonest. And also, she goes on to ignore the fact that Tulsi in her town hall says, I rebuke them, I reject them, and their ideology. There is no place for bigotry or xenophobia in her campaign. Instead of showing that clip, she doubled down on talking about how bad Steve Bannon is, which is already evident. I believe that's a self-describing accusation when you mention Steve Bannon's name. However, it seems to be a tactic that Ana employs basically the whole video. You say Tulsi did something bad, and instead of actually framing the situation around Tulsi and whatever she supposedly did or a policy she supposedly advocated for, she talks about how bad the actual issue is, as if progressives are too stupid to understand this. We know how bad the issues are. The issue that we have is not with you critiquing Tulsi or talking about how bad the issue is. It's the fact that you're completely separating. You're trying to say this issue is so bad, Tulsi probably supported this, and therefore Tulsi is bad because look how bad this issue is. And when you're framing these issues in this way, it once again is disingenuous and intellectually dishonest. Now, if we want to frame issues around guilty, if we want to frame association around guilty or being guilty by association, then I find it really hypocritical of Ana, who is Armenian, to be working for an organization called the Young Turks, considering that the Armenian genocide was perpetuated and caused greatly by an organization called the Young Turks. Now, given that we all know the history of not everybody, but enough of us know the history of the Armenian genocide to at least know that the Young Turks were the ones who were involved, I'm not exactly sure how you, as an Armenian woman, clearly a victim of the diaspora that the Armenian genocide caused, can lob an accusation at Tulsi for someone else endorsing her, despite the fact that Tulsi rebuked that endorsement publicly on national television, and then sit beside a man who named his network the Young Turks after a group that caused the genocide of your own people, and you have yet to rebuke this. I just find that really hypocritical of you. Why haven't you done so? And not only are you part of the organization, you're the host. And it's once again interesting to me how you, as an Armenian, in that video did not mention the fact that Tulsi just recently, in the last couple of days, spoke up about the Armenian genocide and how we need to acknowledge its existence and take steps forward to help the Armenian people heal from it. I would figure that would be something that you would appreciate, but unfortunately it seems to have gone over your head because once again, your bias against Tulsi has been revealed in your logic and your analysis. Over and over again, Ana uses the true statement, by the way, that the U.S. intelligence isn't to be trusted, right? And Tulsi agrees with that. That's one of the things that has made many of us fall in love with her candidacy. However, for Ana to constantly use the idea that the U.S. intelligence agencies like the CIA are not to be trusted, I find it, and she uses these to attack Tulsi. I just find it really ironic that it's okay to use that to attack Tulsi, but it's not okay to use that to hold herself and use that idea to hold herself accountable. Because once again, Ana's right. U.S. intelligence agencies should not be trusted, just as they always say the mainstream shouldn't be trusted. And yet, Ana quotes U.S. intelligence propaganda about Syria, supporting the insurgency against the Bashar al-Assad regime. Now, we can debate back and forth about Bashar al-Assad, but it's interesting to me that she still trusts the U.S. in their propaganda against Assad without question. However, Tulsi Gabbard, being a peacemaker, actually went to Syria, met with the opposition leaders to Assad, and met with Assad after he requested her presence, like a true leader should, getting the actual story on the ground rather than lobbing accusations based off of an intelligence agency report that we know has a habit of being wrong, maliciously so, in order to manufacture consent for regime change wars. She is also, Ana, has gotten it wrong on Venezuela. Once again, using intelligence reports and mainstream media that quotes intelligence reports, lying about Maduro, lying about the the outcome of the election in Venezuela and ignoring all the international reports that directly contradict everything that we have alleged about Venezuela. Now, ironically enough, for Ana to have such a well-known grievance against Donald Trump, I find it funny that she would use the propaganda that is often used to manufacture consent to go into these wars. And once again, we can look at Russiagate as well, where she got it incredibly wrong. And right now, Tulsi Gabbard is the only presidential candidate who has gotten it right. So in the last 3 years, it does seem that Tulsi Gabbard has managed to evolve, but unfortunately, Ana Kasparian has done no such thing. And that's why I find these attacks against Tulsi Gabbard from Ana Kasparian completely and totally disingenuous, and mostly, if not absent of fact, absent of logic, reason, and context. Not to mention, once again, Ana has displayed her hypocrisy, because if you're going to say that Tulsi Gabbard isn't a progressive, strictly based off of foreign policy, and that she isn't progressive on foreign policy, and you're going to do an entire hit piece on her based off of the information that you presented in this video and your logic, why have you not done a similar hit piece on Elizabeth Warren? And in fact, it's been quite the opposite. They oftentimes talk about Elizabeth Warren as a decent candidate, almost saying she's just as good as Bernie Sanders oftentimes as well. And Elizabeth Warren has been known to be really, really bad on foreign policy, advocating for every regime change war that we've been in thus far, pushing the Venezuela conflict in alignment with Donald Trump's attempt to manufacture consent to conduct regime change in Venezuela. Elizabeth Warren was wrong when it came to Syria, and she's been wrong when it comes to AIPAC and Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu as well. An issue that Tulsi has evolved on immensely. Like many people, we were fed propaganda, or she was fed propaganda about our relations to Israel. Recognizing the truth, Tulsi has been one of the most outspoken critics of Israel on Twitter and in some of her speeches, constantly and regularly criticizing the Netanyahu right-wing regime, which is also something that Ana Kasparian fails to mention. Now, I find it weird that in this video that Ana does, the dislike to like ratio was somehow tampered with. I can't really credibly allege that TYT did this on purpose. However, whatever the case may be, it's unacceptable to see someone drop a video like this, have the like to dislike ratio at one point being 980 dislikes to 760 likes, and no one says anything about it. We've even seen comments scrubbed from that same video. And once again, while I cannot credibly allege that TYT was the one who scrubbed it, they have not addressed it, they have not talked about it, and I believe they probably have no plans on doing so. But the amount of dislikes in that video probably demonstrates the way most people feel about Ana's comments. That she is saying that we're not allowed to evolve on the issues, that we are not allowed to examine the rhetoric that we may have used in the past and change for the better once we gain new experiences. Like everyone else in the world, Tulsi is indeed limited by her experiences. However, she's been one of the very few people who have taken those experiences, learned from them, and has grown from them as well. She's by no means perfect, nor do I think she considers herself perfect. The funny thing is, I don't think that anyone who is intending on voting for her at this point consider her to be a perfect human being. Even her father apologized for some of the molding that he had did about Tulsi when it comes to the LGBTQ issues at a young age, saying that he didn't realize the trauma that he had caused his daughter. And when we realize, once again, that we are all limited by our experiences and can sometimes become victims of our very limited experiences, when we realize this, It can help us better understand the evolution that Tulsi Gabbard has clearly displayed. And once again, if anyone has watched any of her interviews at length, I believe that she does a very good job of addressing basically every single problem that Ana Kasparian has with her. Now, Tulsi Gabbard will be on our show live on Friday at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And we're going to give her the space to answer every problem that progressives may have with her. And we'll let her tell you just how much she's evolved and how she got there. But until then, how about we examine the information that's out there and readily available, learn how to use a search engine every now and then, and frame the facts as they should be. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for tuning into this very special segment of Mi Casa es Su Casa, and always remember, more than anything else, find your balance. Peace. Thanks for watching that segment of Mi Casa es Su Casa. Don't forget to join us on Roku and catch our Roku exclusives. Also, help us reach our goal of 500 patrons on Patreon. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and JustNForm.com. But more than anything else, always remember, find your balance. Peace.